welcome to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca, and today I'm on my way to work, pressing Peggy back into daily duties after a little bit of time away, having some work done on her engine. She had some work done on her engine, came back to me the Wednesday before the NEC, was used for work that day, and then came up with me to the NEC to be displayed on the NEC stand for the Morris Minor Owners Club Young Members. So I thought I'd tell you a little bit about this year's show, but primarily from the perspective of someone who actually organised the stand this year. I've recently kind of taken on the running of the Young Members side of things, and that involved this year, for the first time, my second only time attending the NEC, actually running the stand. So as a punter, you might realise that it probably takes quite a lot to put on such a show, but what you might not realise is planning pretty much starts as soon as the last one's finished for the organisers of the whole event. And for people who are putting on stands, organisation starts way back in March, around the time of the restoration show actually. So it's quite a big piece of work that's ongoing throughout the year. There's loads of bits of paperwork that have to be done by certain times, and you have to kind of keep an eye on when all that is. On top of that, you have to find cars for the stand, and the commitment to having your car on the stand is a big one for most people, because your car, and most likely you, need to be there from Thursday all the way through till Sunday, and you've got to get the car there and then do all of the stuff to get it prepared to be on the stand for the weekend, and then be there all weekend in some way, shape or form. So it's a big ask, and that was kind of one of my first hurdles as an organiser. I put out an application form, and a lot of people talk about being really keen to be on the NEC stand, but then when they read through their application forms, it seems like they're somewhat put off by that level of commitment, because the applications that came in from the young members were actually quite few and far between, which is why Peggy ended up back on the stand this year to get our numbers from 3 to 4 in terms of the number of cars that are on the stand. I was really lucky that the 3 cars that were on the stand also really fitted with the theme. Sometimes it can be really hard for a small group to kind of offer anything up to the theme, because you haven't got much choice in kind of what cars are available. But we were really lucky. We had Nathaniel, who was there with Sarah, who was named after his mum, who unfortunately passed away 7 years ago, but had always loved Morris Minors. So he bought the car with the same birth year as his mum to kind of remember her and be able to carry on going on adventures with her. We had Elliot, who had Alison, and Alison is the next in a long line of Morris Minors within his family. His first, and the car that he learned to drive in, but also just kind of another Morris Minor for their family, though she's unique in many ways. We've also had Fryer, who was there with June. You might know Fryer from Fat Fryer Productions over here on YouTube with Project Daily Drive, where he's been working on Jean, the car that was on the stand, to get her into kind of shape for daily driving. And June is actually named after his gran, who had owned Morris Minors while Fryer was growing up, and you've actually seen Fryer talking about Jean in my interview with the young members here on the podcast. So they were really in keeping with the theme, and also they were able to all produce a lot of photos from their childhood and kind of family photos of them all enjoying cars of various different shapes and forms as they grow up, which we displayed alongside the cars, as well as a little write-up that I'd put together for each car to hopefully draw a few more people into looking at the cars, because there was a lot of Morris Minors at the show, and so it was nice to see people coming up and having a read of the bits of paper, having a look at the photos, and really engaging with the cars throughout the weekend, which they might not have done if it had just been kind of the cars sat there on their own, because they might have thought, well, it's just some more Morris Minors that are perhaps a little bit rustier than some of the others that we've seen. I also had to ask out on Facebook and Instagram if there was any people who were willing to have photos of their families and their cars on display on the stand, because I wanted to put together a banner that displayed Morris Minors nowadays in kind of family use in the same way that they have been for kind of generations, alongside period advertisements selling them as a family car. And that took some time to kind of gather together, to put the posters together, and then have those printed. So it's all this sort of stuff that takes time, and admittedly I think I left a bit of it a little last minute this year, but I'm hoping I'll be able to learn from that and do a little better next year. Then we get to the actual Thursday of the show, and I have work, so I have to rely on the wonderful guys and their cars getting there, being able to find their way around the NEC for the first time, find the stand and getting themselves kind of set up in a diagram that I had scribbled together on WhatsApp for them, and also getting to grips with collecting wristbands and things like that while I was still at work. I was really fortunate that I essentially turned up quite late on the Thursday, drove in, parked up, put up a couple of the banners that I had in my car up, and then it was the stand was set up. The guys had done most of the kind of work for us, and even had time to spend a little bit of time in Spoons in the afternoon. We head back to an Airbnb that we've got booked together on the Thursday. On the way out, I get very distracted by various things, including a welded statue of my favourite Disney Pixar character, Wally, that I was fortunate to essentially walk past every morning that I came into the show, which always made me smile. Back at the Airbnb, it was time for a bit of a Top Trumps tournament, which has become somewhat synonymous with Young Members, and some takeaway and drawing up some timetables. Then it's time for the first day of the show, and it was the first Friday that I'd actually been able to attend, because last year I'd had to go back to work and do teaching on the Friday of the show, so it was great to kind of be there, and I wasn't scheduled for first on the stand that day, so I was actually able to go and have a bit of a wander around some of the halls. We were situated in Hall 4, and surrounded by loads of wonderful British Leyland and BMC cars, because they tend to kind of theme things together like that. But also we were near the Grey Classic Car Group, which you saw in last week's podcast. I was able to interview Jim and Sean from that in their Crown Vic Police Interceptor. But it's always a great stand to be near, because they've always got such fantastic variety, and there's always something kind of different to see as you walk past, usually kind of on the way to the toilets or the food when you're on the stand kind of thing. So it's nice to have some good variety around us. On that morning I managed to do a bit of Hall 3 and Hall 4 and the tiniest bit of Hall 5. I essentially popped into Hall 5 to spot the guys on the Singer Owners Club, ask them about some of their young owners that they had on their stand, and doing some interviews, catch up with some friends who had come along for the day there, and then essentially head back to the stand because it had got to lunchtime. But there were some highlights of my walk around on the Friday. I really enjoyed the huge BMC Works van. It's actually the same as the one that I'd seen at Classic Affair earlier in the year, but had kind of come to the end, different van, but the same thing essentially. But it was the other end of its restoration. It had all its bodywork all painted up and things like that. So it was interesting to kind of see the two ends of that, and also be able to go inside and have a walk around, which they were really encouraging to do. I always love the Morris commercials stands, and this year they had adorable little mini versions of the Morris commercials sat in their flatbeds at the back, which made me smile and I really enjoyed. The Austin County stand was also a beautiful stand, and I believe this stand also won Stand of the Year at the Classic and Sports Car Awards on the Friday night, and I can see why. They always put on a great display. They're some of the most beautiful cars to see, and they were parked quite close to us, so it meant that I got a lot of opportunities to walk past and admire their gorgeous cars and their gorgeous display, which also included a little J40 sat in the back of a pickup, which is seems to be a theme of the show, but I guess fits with that idea of part of the family and it all being kind of linked together. Friday afternoon I was back on the stand, and I used my time on the stand and being near Peggy to collar a couple of young owners from the wonderful young owners stands that were around us, as well as from the singer owners stand, to do a couple of interviews, which you'll have already seen on the channel. It was great to talk to people and get to know them all a little bit better, hear a little bit about their cars, and it's just a really nice way to get to know people. I'm really grateful for the podcast for giving me that excuse to have little chats with people and hear some of their fantastic car stories. And I really hope that you guys enjoyed those too. If you've not seen them already, make sure you go and check them out, because those guys who did those interviews deserve a lot of attention. Friday night we tried to go out for a meal with some of the young members groups. However, TGI Fridays didn't really understand our request for a table of 11. So when they offered us 4 separate tables of 4 in different parts of the restaurant, nowhere near each other, we decided to go back to the Airbnb, get some takeaway and things like that. Unfortunately, our little Kia, which we'd been using as a bit of a runabout between the NEC and the Airbnb as a way to kind of save on Ubers, received an absolutely massive puncture, and so when the guys tried to use it to pop to Tesco's and things like that, the huge nail that had gone in the top of the tyre and out the sidewall rather put pay to that, and it wasn't helped by the fact that our car doesn't have a spare tyre. It's just got one of those annoying roadside repair kits, which doesn't really work when your car's got 2 big holes in the tyre. Jamie managed to get it pumped up, drive a couple of miles, pump back up, drive a couple of miles, and back home, and then on the following morning took it to Quick Fit, but it rather delayed our evening a little bit in terms of getting food, getting drink, and kind of relaxing at the Airbnb. But it was a nice surprise to find out on that Friday night that I'd actually been shortlisted for the Star of the Future award at the Classic and Sports Car Magazine Club Awards on the Friday night. It was really lovely to kind of read what had been said about me, and to hear that some of the work that I've been doing with the young members and also here on the podcast had been appreciated. Saturday morning I had a few errands to run for the stand, including switching over some wristbands, collecting a few bits and bobs for people from other stands, and in between that I was able to have a quick nosy in Hall 1 and 2. whilst in there I managed to catch up with Sarah Crabtree and the other guys from Evoke, who were so lovely to meet earlier in the year when we was all together on the motorist little road run, and managed to pick up a Evoke classic calendar for charity that they had on the stand, because there was a tiny little picture of Peggy in the little collage of entrance at the back, but also it's really great to see some of the other photos that were selected, and who doesn't love some classic cars on their wall. I also managed to finally meet Abby from Abs June on Instagram, who owns the beautiful black VW Beetle, Ed. She was over on the Rolls-Royce and Bentley stand in Hall 1, and was someone that I've been trying to meet up with last year at the show, in March at the show, and finally we managed to actually catch each other at the show this year. So that was really nice to actually meet her in person, and have a little catch up on how Ed's doing, and inform her about kind of how Peggy was doing. It was a lovely stand as well to have a look around, and some nice variety. In these stands I also really enjoyed the Renault 5 stand. Obviously got quite into those thanks to my friend buying a Renault 5 and absolutely loving it, and they had a great selection, including one that was very similar to his, even an automatic. So I sent him lots of photos, which I think he enjoyed. And also, having become a big fan of Le Mans 66, the movie, it was great to have a little nosy around the Ford GT40s that were on display in Hall 1 as well. When I got back to the stand, I was thrilled to be surprised by Steph from I'd Rather Classic / Lancaster Insurance, and the other young members who had got together to give me a little goodie back to say congratulations for the award that I'd been nominated for. It was filled with top trumps, which we are clearly finding are my favourite, and some roses, a big tin of roses, which I was thrilled to share with the stand because our box of celebrations was already nearly out, and a few other little goodies as well. Most of the rest of the day was spent on the stand, and it was great to kind of have a chat and get to know some people who were coming past the stand, and were interested in the young owners. Had a good chat with a few people who were new young Morris owners, and also some people who had owned their Moggies for a little bit longer but hadn't realised that there was kind of a growingly active Morris Minor Young Owners section again. So hopefully we'll see a few more of those people at future events, including the Christmas event in just a couple of days' time when this podcast goes out. At the end of the day, the guys who had been off for a wander, including Jamie, who kept wandering off and coming back with new tools, all came back to the stand, so I was able to go for a little bit of a wander with Jamie through Hall 5, which was really nice. We got to see kind of some of the rest of the cars that were in there. Jamie got to have a good chat with the Triumph Sporting 6 Club. He got to moan about his Spitfire, which seems to be one of his favourite hobbies at the moment, and also learn about some of the cool things that they put on for their club members. And it was just really good to talk to them because they've been really supportive of the podcast and stuff on social media whenever I posted pictures of their Spitfire. So that was nice. There was also a really funky Rover P6 on display that was made up of loads of different colours that had been available on a Rover, which really caught my eye. Great to see some of the big American and hot roddy stuff as well on display there, and also some of the cars that I'd enjoyed watching on the Late Break Show were also on display. It was great to see them guys having a stand together, and I was also able to pick up a little sticker from the Late Break Show as well. I popped to the toilet, and whilst I was in the toilet, apparently Jamie saw Richard Hammond pop into the toilets. So when I came back out, we stood there, him telling me this story, at which point Richard Hammond re-emerges from the bathrooms, which I thought was quite funny, and also was the only chance I actually had to see Richard Hammond that weekend, which was, I guess, just a weird way to meet someone that you've seen on the telly, and it did make us laugh. It was then back to the stand to gather up our bits and head off into town with the rest of the young members groups. Some of the TR youth guys had planned for us all to go into town and have a bit of fun, grab some food and some drinks. So we went into town, got ourselves a drink in a very crowded Spoons, then went to a Tim Hortons, then out to an Irish bar, and then back to a Tim Hortons. I was able to have my first ever Guinness, and Jamie was able to have his first ever Tim Hortons. So that was a lot of fun. And it was great to be able to spend even more time with some of the young members groups that we've been surrounded by at the show. I think some good new friendships were founded over the weekend, thanks to being placed with a lot of young members groups again, and hopefully we can start to do a few more kind of cross-group activities and invite each other to a few more of our young events. Had a slower, quieter start for us. I went in first thing with my dad and my sister, who had come down for the day, picked me up from the Airbnb and got us into the halls while the rest of them carried on packing up, cleaning up and signing out of the Airbnb for the day. Whilst I was kind of stood round on the stand in the morning, I was able to catch up with Charlie, who was there with her dad, and it was the first time that I managed to meet her dad, but I didn't have much of a conversation with her dad. Jamie actually spent a lot of time learning some stuff off of Charlie's dad instead. I managed to meet up with Izzy, who I'd not seen since Thorsby, and finally also meet Izzy's mum, who was really cool and has some really awesome ideas about kind of helping other people get to grips with owning their classic cars, which was great to hear. I was also really lucky that the kind of celebrations and kind things that the other young members were doing for each other continued, and Nathaniel actually organised for a friend of mine who was over in the Comic-Con halls to pop over all dressed up as Captain America, because he is one of the most screen accurate Captain Americas that I know, and have some photos with Peggy, because whilst I've been able to do a few Captain Carter shoots with my car, I've not actually managed to get a photo of a Captain America with them. So I was really grateful to Hugh and Nathaniel for that, and got some really great photos of me showing Hugh around the car, getting him to kind of try and get himself into a Morris Minor, which was decidedly difficult because he's a very tall man, and obviously all bulked up in all of his Captain America gear. When I was able to pop round for my last wander around the show, we popped and did a little bit more of the auto jumble. I'd heard a rumour that in the auction section there was one of Betty Haig's cars that had sold the previous day. So I got in there and had a look, got some photos, and hopefully that can be added to a growing collection of photos of me with Betty Haig's cars. Turning into a real fangirl now. I also was really lucky to persuade 3 owners who had their cars on display to do a little interview with me about their cars, about having their cars on display at the NEC. And again, you'll have seen those interviews go out last week. It was a huge privilege, and I'm really thankful to everyone who let me sit in their cars. So that's Bernie from the Traction Owners Club, Jim and Sean, who had their Crown Vic on the Gay Classic Car Group stand, and also the wonderful, wonderful Sandy, who I was sat in his very unique Singer 9 Le Mans that actually raced at Le Mans for ages, because every time we tried to conduct an interview, the bands that were there in the Wings tour bus started playing up. So we had, I think it was a talk for about half an hour in his car, and what was recorded was probably about 10 minutes or so. But it was great to kind of have a chat with him, and he was a fantastic person to hear his stories, to hear more about the wonderful car that he'd got on display there, and also the sister car that he owns but is in the process of restoring. By the time I'd managed to finish my interview with Sandy, it was then pretty much head back to the stand and wait just a few moments until it was the horns blaring and the end of the show. It was a fantastic weekend, and it's always so emotional when the horns blow, because it's a case of, oh no, it's over, and I didn't really want it to be. Horns all tooted out. It was time to pack our stand up and head off. I was the last to go to kind of make sure that everything was cleared up and everything, given that the others had put so much time in on the Thursday to get set up. So it was then head out. Jamie had left a little bit earlier than me to head out to the car park to find the Kia with its brand new tyre, and try and fight his way out through the manic car parks on that Sunday night. So we decided we'd both meet up at Rugby Services to grab some food on the way home, and whilst I pulled into Rugby Services to wait for him to catch up, because even though I left later than him, I had a whole lot less traffic than he did to contend with. So whilst I was sat there waiting for him, got a knock on my window, as Furious Driving Matt had the same idea, and was there grabbing a coffee before he set off on his trip. So he hopped inside Peggy. No interviews were conducted, but it was nice to have a little catch up with him, because it'd been so busy all weekend. I'd been running around doing loads of stuff, and he'd been really busy on his stand. We hadn't actually managed to say much more than hello right on the first day whilst I was in setup. So nice to catch up with so many people this weekend. There's probably loads more people that I haven't had chance to think about. So Chris from Twitter, Ian from Fixing Assets, loads of people that was great to see and great to have a chat to, but just had not got much chance to say more than hello to with such a busy weekend. But that's the thing, when you go to the NEC, you're either going for the cars, to chat to the people, or the auto jumble, to try and do it all in one day, which is what most people go for unless you're exhibiting. Near impossible. It's a huge event, and I'm fortunate that by running a stand I'm there for the 3 days, but it's even that, with kind of being tied to a stand a little bit of the time, and the stuff that I wanted to do with the podcast there, certainly kept me really busy. So I don't think I spent all that much time on the auto jumble, much to Jamie's disgrace, and I don't think last year I tried really hard to see all of the cars that were on display, and there's just no chance of that happening. You're never going to be able to see it, and you'll watch other people's videos of kind of what had happened and what they'd seen, and you'll always be like, oh, I didn't even know that was there. So I'm pretty happy with what I saw. It was a fantastic show of cars, and as it always is, and I'm really looking forward to next year. So on that note, I'm going to wrap up this incredibly long podcast. I hope you've enjoyed listening. If you did come over and say hello to the Young Members stand, thank you very much. If came over and said hello to me. Doubly thank you. And I hope you've enjoyed this run of NEC content on the channel. It'll be over now for a little bit, I promise, and we've got some other fantastic stuff coming up instead. But thank you ever so much for listening. Drive safely and happy motoring.